period starting on September 15th and expanding on October 15th. It was enacted into law on August 17th, 1988, on the approval of Public Law 100-402. The day of September 15th is significant because it is the anniversary of independence for Latin American countries such as Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In addition, Mexico and Chile celebrate their Independence Days on September 16th and September 18th, respectively. Also, Columbus Day, or Dia de la Raza, which is October 12th, falls within this 30-day period. Our discussion today will explore several topics about the Hispanic culture, to include history, education, family, myth busting, colorism, and other related topics. American history states that we were colonized, that there was colonization that began from England, looking for a new world. But people were already living here when they arrived. Those people were forced to move off of their land. It's important to remember the culture that was already here when explorers settled on this land. It's important we keep the integrity of the influences of Hispanic and Latin American history and culture. The people who are represented on this panel are descendants of this beautiful culture that has not been represented so well in American history. They also understand the importance of how to reach these various cultures and include social theories in the way that we teach. So, with that being said, I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves in a little more depth. So today we have a few employees from the university and the mayor of the city of Killeen. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. So when I call on your name, if you don't mind giving us a brief introduction of who you are, your position here or within the city, and of course, your Hispanic culture and your heritage. So I'm going to start with Dr. Salazar, if you don't mind.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Dalila Salazar, and I serve as an assistant professor of marketing for the College of Business Administration at A&M Central Texas. I also serve as a director for the University Center for Applied Research and Engagement and the NSF-IUCRC at our institution. I'm incredibly excited to be here, and as a point of identification, I am Mexican American. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Carla?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carla Perez, and thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor and a pleasure. I am the New Student Programs Coordinator for Texas A&M Central Texas, and I have been I've been in the United States since the age of 6, but I was born in El Salvador. And I love that we're doing this, and I just want to tell everybody that thank you so much for joining. It means a lot to see all these names pop up.
Thank you. Dr. Close.
Oh, good morning. Special greetings, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning and all the other panelists. I can lay no claim to official Hispanic heritage, but I was I landed in San Antonio and grew up around the culture from a very, very young age, and that culture adopted me. So it has been a part of my research, it's been a part of my career, it's just been a part of everything that I've held dear for a very long time. I am the university's communications officer, and it is a pleasure to be asked to speak.
Thank you so much. And Mayor Segarra, if you would. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Jose Segarra. I am the City of Killeen Mayor for about 4 years, so thank you for inviting me. I appreciate hanging out with so many smart people. I think I'm the only one that doesn't have doctor in front of it, so I appreciate that. You guys are awesome. I was born in Puerto Rico when I was born in Ponce, but at age 3, my family decided to move, and so I was raised in Chicago, the city of Chicago, until I joined the Army at early age. I was a junior in high school when I joined. I actually came in at 18, and Killeen Killeen happened to be my last duty station. After 10 years, I decided to leave the Army and stay here in this great area of Central Texas, and have joined it ever since. I've been here for about 30 years. 1990 is when I got here, so enjoy every moment.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to start off with a question, and I think we could maybe perhaps just go around in the same order, just to make sure that we don't talk over each other, if you don't mind. So my first question to the panel is, what were the influences that were a part of your nurturing as you were growing up that brought a sense of pride of being an American as well as a Hispanic or Latin American? I think Dr. Salazar, if you would like to start.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of nurturing in my upbringing that brought a sense of pride, my parents and my family have really formed a critical part of my upbringing, and being surrounded by a predominantly Hispanic community that was very hardworking, me being able to see my parents' hard work and their work ethic on a daily basis was really inspirational for me to work on my own work ethic as I was growing and building in my responsibilities throughout the course of my lifetime. And so it makes me really happy to know that the people that surrounded me in my community, particularly my family members, were of ardent importance to my understanding of what it means to be a Mexican American that that contributes to my family, to society, and to our community at large.
Thank you. Carla?
Yes, ma'am. I've been blessed that my family is very diverse. So, like I said, I came to the States when I was very young, and my maternal grandmother was pivotal in keeping my Salvadorian culture alive. She was always very adamant about me remembering where I came from. My mom at times wanted me to kind of forget that and embrace more of the American aspect of who I was becoming, but my grandma always went back and said, "No, Mama, don't ever forget where you came from. Be proud of who you are." And then I think once my mom realized that it wasn't a bad thing to be Salvadorian, she wanted me to kind of feel out both countries. So I was very blessed in that I was able to go for the beginning part of my life back and forth. So I was really entrenched in both cultures. And then in America, my stepfather, my mom married an Anglo-Saxon gentleman, and he taught us everything that it meant to be American. And when we became citizens, you know, it was just, I was torn because I didn't want to give away my Salvadorianness, but I was so proud that I was able to become part of this great nation. And now with my own daughters, I share that pride, and I don't ever want them to say, "Oh, I don't want to be American. I don't want to be an American." I'm like, be proud of it, because so many of us have struggled and have fought so hard to come here and be part of this and be accepted. And then just don't be accepted, become a leader within your folks, you know, within your culture, and show them the good stuff that we have. So
Thank you so much. Dr. Close.
Yeah, hi, thanks. You know, I've been thinking about this as everyone else has been talking. That I grew up in a military family, and as a result of that, we were constantly around all people of color, Asians and Hispanics and African Americans, and it was like a big melting pot of culture. But I was about, I don't know, 13 years old when we moved to San Antonio, and the amazing thing that nurtured me was just how much the Hispanic culture embraced me. It didn't matter that I wasn't genetically Hispanic. For example, I had to learn to speak Spanish because my true love's parents, he was the youngest of 13, only spoke Spanish in the household. And when we went home to visit them, if I wanted to talk to his family, I needed to be able to speak Spanish, understand what he was saying on the phone, to be sure he wasn't making jokes about me. But every time I would, you know, mess up my Spanish, I would be so patiently and so gently corrected. And there was just such a loving atmosphere in the culture overall that really embraced me. And I will never forget that. I don't know that I would have found it in any other culture. It was just, a patient introduction to our language and our food and our habits and our ways of life and our spirituality. And it really enriched my life for the better.
Thank you.
In fact, if I can add, one of the spaces on our campus in Founders Hall on the fourth floor, the wing on the wing that faces the parking lot, I have chosen to name for his mother, Santos Maria Urabaso Rodriguez. And I was the sponsor for that space, and I named it for her. She used to often talk about how education was unavailable to her, yet she was one of the wisest women I've ever known. And I swear she would have been a Supreme Court justice had she had any access to education whatsoever, which is why it's become such a huge part of the focus of my career in terms of research and study.
Thank you so much. Mayor.
Yes, I think growing up in Chicago, I was born, like I said, in Puerto Rico, but in the areas where I grew up in Chicago, it was mostly Mexican. And so a lot of that Hispanic culture, I was always surrounded by it. And so when you grow up in an area like that, you don't realize what you have. And I made mention the other day, and it wasn't until I joined the Army. I joined the Army, and that's when I really started to understand the Hispanic culture and, for that matter, the Puerto Rican culture. Because I remember being in Korea. When you go to Korea, you're there 1 year. But when they realize you're from Puerto Rico, they all tend to hang out. And so, I mean, they start cooking and they start doing all kinds of Puerto Rican stuff that in reality, growing up in Chicago, I really didn't even like that stuff. My mother would cook Puerto Rican food and I want a hamburger. I want French fries. But then I join the Army and you start hanging around with Puerto Ricans that love to do that. And it's like, wow, you start to connect, with the culture in a way that has more meaning, I think. And same thing in Germany. In Germany is where I learned to enjoy the Spanish music. Growing up, I didn't really like it. You're a kid and I want to listen to American, I want to listen to rock and roll. And then I go to Germany, hanging around with some Hispanics and they're playing merengue and salsa. And then I go home and my family is shocked. They're like, what? You're listening to Spanish music? And then I say, Mom, I love arroz con gandules. And she's like, what? You hated that stuff growing up. So it wasn't until I got out of that I really appreciated. And even as mayor, sometimes I kid around with people because sometimes people would say, Mayor, there's something wrong with Colleen. Colleen, this is wrong with it. This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. And I say, you know what? You probably grew up in Colleen, right? Because me, coming from Chicago, I look from a different perspective and I look from an outside perspective and I say, wow, Colleen, it's an awesome place because when you compare it to other cities, I lived in the Bay Area for a while, San Francisco, and you look and you compare, it's like, it doesn't compare. I mean, it is much better here than a lot of the other areas. And so I kind of relate that with a Hispanic culture. Sometimes we just got to get out of it to really appreciate what we really have. There was a book I read many years ago, and it was a little short book. It was called Diamonds of Acres, and it was about a guy that had a farm, and he was looking for diamonds. So he ends up selling the farm to travel the world to find his riches of diamonds. And when it turned out, the guy that bought the diamond, his farm, ended up finding diamonds in the very farm that he bought. And so sometimes, within our really sometimes appreciate it as much. And so from my perspective, that's where I really got to know it. I still appreciate it here. People know, hey, you're from Puerto Rico, and you end up connecting much quicker because we seem to share that. It's not like growing up in Chicago where everybody was Hispanic. And so we don't really celebrate it because that's how everybody is. But when you come into a community like Killeen where we're diversified, we got a lot of diversity. We seem to connect a little bit better. But I would say that where I got my biggest influences in the Hispanic culture was my growing up, those 10 years that I spent in the military.
Thank you. The next question. So race in general in this country tends to be something that we tiptoe around because we don't quite know how to approach it sometimes. However, in specific cultures like Hispanic cultures are familiar to us that it becomes a conversation that we're okay with having. So my question is, what have you experienced as far as having racial or ethnic conversations that you've had with people outside of your culture about who you are?
I think that in terms of the race-based question outside of my community, it's always an interesting thing to kind of broach and approach because when you look at somebody, I don't think that you can necessarily identify whom they are, what their ethnic background is. And I find it fascinating because I've been asked if I am a variety of different things from all around the world. And it's a beautiful way of being able to approach the conversation about my particular background. And I think that having those conversations is incredibly important because you're able to share in the things that make, your background special, but also open up to those individuals that are curious about how it is that maybe you can engage in the conversation a little bit more, because I find that if we get to learn about each other and really delve into that in an embracing way, that it leads to added conversations that lead to an exploration and appreciation of people all around. And so a lot of people do tiptoe around it, but I really try to make it a comfortable conversation wherein it's an opportunity for added dialogue instead of a negative kind of situation, depending on how it's presented.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Salazar, I agree with that. I don't know, Hispanic culture, Latinos, however you wish to identify yourself as, is so broad, so we are probably one of the largest races in the world because you find us with if you go to Peru, you find us with a lot of Japanese influence versus if you come more towards the Caribbean, we have more African American influence and all that, or African influences. So my only thing that I find a little, at times, kind of annoying is that as soon as someone sees me, the first thing they say is, "Oh, you must be Mexican." There's more than just Mexican, there's just in Central America, there's 6 different countries. But I do enjoy those conversations. I enjoy opening up those conversations because you begin to explore with those folks. And a lot of times it's not because people they do it out of, malice or anything. They do it because that's what they know. That's what they understand. That's what they see in the media. They see that's very dominant to them. But I enjoy having those broader, well, where is El Salvador? Or where is Honduras or Costa Rica? What do you guys, what do you guys like? And even with our own Hispanic folks, having those conversations, we find that we have so much more things in common that we don't. For instance, we all have like similar dishes, like plates and like cultural how we celebrate our festivities, our Christmases and things like that. So by having those conversations, we find how much more alike we are than how much different we are. So I love that, and I'm not one of those, I'm just going to sit here and be like, "Oh, I'm Salvadorian, look at me," because my husband is from Puerto Rico and we both celebrate that, and we just want people to know that there's so much involved. And I love having those conversations.
So just a follow-up question, Carla. You said people just assume you're Mexican. Is that here in the United States, or because when we spoke, you mentioned that your family, has a background in Spain and other countries. So, because I get that a lot too, but I'm from New York, and on the East Coast, I think we're so used to being so blended that I get that question a lot less over there because everybody's so used to a mix. They kind of know better not to assume in a way, because it's just part of their daily lives. So I was just wondering if that's something that you kind of experienced more here, maybe even in the state of Texas than anywhere else.
Most definitely in Texas. And I mean, because of our proximity to Mexico. Now, I was in Germany for a bit, and in Germany, the folks there were more just inclined to say you're Latino, Latina. You know, they really wouldn't peg you as one or other because they have Spain nearby and all that. But you're very correct on that. Like in Texas, yes, I always get, are you Mexican? When I was in the coast, I was in Virginia for a while. I got a little bit more of, are you Puerto Rican? Or, you know, actually what I get a lot is, what are you? Because if you understand Spanish and you hear me speak Spanish, you have no idea where to peg me. My own family doesn't understand because I'm just a really good mix of everything. So, but you know, and that's, it's my responsibility to teach folks that there's so many of us and there's such a beautiful culture, even though it's, you know, it's got all these tiny little pieces that make it up. We're still Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, Hispanic, however you like to identify it. You know, we're just a big, beautiful mix of stuff.
Absolutely. My mother would call us the rainbow people. And I
Yes,
think that's
absolutely.
so appropriate
Mhm.
because we are such a blend, and some of us look like you wouldn't know who we are, what we are, because our colors are so different.
Mhm.
Dr. Close?
That's a perfect segue into what I was going to say. Obviously, because I am not Hispanic biologically, I get caught in the crossfire a lot because I have always affiliated so closely with that community, even as a young person. Um, the Hispanics, not all, but some, are patently curious about why is a weta, and you know, weta, we all understand that word, and it can be affectionate or insulting depending on who's issuing you the word. But folks have actually asked me, why is a weta so involved in our community? Why do you care about this community so much? Well, because people I love, you know, are a part of that community, because that community has loved me back. And then to white people, I get the same question. Why aren't you this involved in an Anglo community? Why aren't you, you know, I have Italian, German, Jewish, Australian roots. Well, I guess if there were a community of those people, I might be, but that's not me toward this culture. So I'm constantly in a place of having to justify and defend, you know, my involvement in, my interest in, my research in, my support of and advocacy for the Hispanic community. And I'm happy to answer. It's just that I'm not sure if there's an answer that ever makes sense to someone, you know, who's asking that question. Because honestly, when we reflect on the words of John Williams, I'm, I'm sorry, John Lewis, John often talked about the beloved community, and he wasn't referencing an African American exclusive community. He was talking about a community of people who came together to celebrate their cultures and understand and accept each other, to be able to speak to each other, to be able to learn from each other, to be able to live productively with each other. And I like to think that my involvement in this community is an example that that's possible. That is what is meant by the beloved community. And we should be able to move beyond a point where a person who is not of color has to justify their involvement in anyone else's culture. It's the way it should be.
Thank you.
Yes.
Who's next? Me? I'm good.
Yes, sir. You are.
Right. Uh, when you talk about race, I think that, you know, it's been mentioned, you know, we all come in different colors. Dr. Close there, you remind me of one of my aunts. And in Puerto Rico, we come in all different colors. My grandmother, she was kind of in dark skin, you know, it's black. And so my aunts on the other side, they're very light skinned. And so we all come in different colors. Sometimes I think, you know, a lot of the ignorance that we used to see in the past, I think that with more and more Hispanics coming into the U.S., I think that people are starting to understand that and it's just something that I enjoy having those conversations with. When somebody talks about race, I like the history. I always mention the history of the Hispanic culture. You know, we have such a rich history, and we go back even before the United States was the United States. And sometimes a lot of people don't know that. They don't understand. Most of the people that we talk about Christopher Columbus coming and discovering uh, the Americas, but everybody on that ship was of Hispanic culture. You know, they all had Spanish names. So, you know, it's just making people understand the rich culture that we have. A lot of us are blended with other countries. You know, you talk to my wife, she's Mexican culture. She was actually born in America. She's from El Paso, but she is white. You know, she's a light skin. And then you say, where is her grandfather? He's Italian. And she even has relatives that go back to the Civil War. And I say, wait a minute, you know, you got Mexicans in the Civil War. So it is just amazing when you dig deep the many roots that the Hispanic culture has. And so, yeah, I think that the history of the Hispanic culture is amazing. It's just letting people know, bring it out more, you know, have it spoken more within our school systems and things like that, and people would be amazed. So.
Absolutely. Are any of you first generation college or high school graduates? Or was education, so that for my
I am.
panelists, you are? Okay. Okay. And that's awesome. That's great. I know in my household, my mother stressed education. I could not come home unless I was going to go to college and get a degree. So that was stressed, and to this day, I still think about that. Um, what were your aspirations educationally? Was there anyone in your life who represented that American dream that made you aspire and want to get that degree and created a pathway for you that may not have been evident to your family if it wasn't a family member?
Are we still going in order?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Go ahead, Dr. Close.
Well, my mother, I'd like to segue in an interesting perspective, I hope. My mother was not a very educated person. In fact, only her brother was allowed to go to college. And he started but never finished. And I recently learned, my mother is now 92 years old, and I like to have conversations with her about her past so I can, you know, enrich what I know about my family. And she told me recently that she was told that she was mentally retarded when she was a girl, that she wasn't fast enough for college, that she couldn't learn. And hearing that said just broke my heart, that, you know, anyone could be so easily written off by members of their family. I know it happens, I know it's common, but for me, it wasn't so much my family that made me want to go to school. Not in an inspirational sense. I saw the life my mother led, which was very difficult. She didn't have choice over her reproductive freedom, and she was pregnant many, many, many times, many more times than I think what was normal for a woman of her age. And she was not able to carry her babies to term because she's very small. She's only 4'7". And that had an impact on me. I did not want to live my life that way. And I knew that education was the way I was going to be able to stay out of poverty, to be able to make a stable life for myself, and to be able to contribute something worthwhile to my community. So I'm the first in my family ever to get an undergraduate degree. I started in community colleges and made my career there. And I'm very proud of what that institution did to shape me. So it would be that family that really supported me throughout. And by that family, I mean the community college family.
Thank you so much.
I can go ahead now with my response. In terms of my educational background, I am the first in my family to have received a college degree and then to work on a master's and a PhD. And after that particular experience, several of my family members went back to school. I think that my parents have always been my source of inspiration because, like I mentioned before, their work ethic is just tremendous. And I could see from very early on that they were giving up a lot of themselves and they were giving up a lot of their own personal opportunities to be able to make sure that I had the opportunities that I needed to be successful through the course of my my schooling. And they were really my inspiration for the American dream because they were here and they were working hard and they were working for our family and they were working for growth and prosperity, not just for our own family, but for those around us and for our community at large as well.
I just want to follow up a little bit with that, Dr. Salazar. Do you think that your parents made those sacrifices just because they were your parents? You know, because I know I'm not a parent, but I can imagine if I had a child, I would do anything and everything I could. But do you think that your culture had any influence behind that, them making sure that you had everything you needed in order to be successful? Perhaps because maybe they thought it would be harder for you? Do you think that had anything to do with it?
So they were always my champion. And it's interesting because a story comes to mind that my mother shared with me a while back that she's never really shared with anybody. So now you're all privy to this, I suppose. But when she moved here, she was in high school and she's incredibly smart. My parents are so brilliant. And just because they're not educated doesn't mean that they're not incredibly intelligent. There are so many, as Dr. Close mentioned, there's so many people that are so incredibly intelligent that don't have the educational background that other people do. But when she came to the United States, she was actually bullied in high school, and she did really well in her education before, and she was bullied in high school, and she was afraid and she was uncomfortable because she was made fun of, and she was the different person, the person that was out in her high school, right, the oddball out, because of our culture and because of who she was inherently, and that made her afraid of going back to her high school, and she just didn't because of that particular situation. And so from that, she decided to work on making money and making sure that, you know, she was making something of herself positively and prospering in a different route. And to me, that's incredibly disheartening because had she had the opportunity to be able to complete her high school education, she would have been tremendously successful in college and would have contributed in so many other ways. But as a result, and kind of as life's path unfolded, our life and our stories are beautifully defined because then you make opportunities in other areas. And as a result, she's also gone back and she's, you know, worked on her education and my father has as well. And I think that it wasn't necessarily because, you know, because as a parent, you want to do everything for your child, though I think that has some merit and some truth to it. I also think that because of their experiences, they had kind of foresight in terms of what potential challenges may take place and how it is that they needed to pave the way for my own success in a way that would prevent me from experiencing some of the things that they experienced as they were going through their own childhood and then young adolescence.
Thank you. Carla?
Well, my story is kind of funny. My father was a college professor, so he always regarded education, you know, as pivotal. But unfortunately, he passed away when I was very young, so my mom was kind of left, you know, to her own, and she decided that she wanted to come to America and get her education in America. But then, you know, she had to provide for us, so she kind of put that on hold. And then when my brother, my sister, and I came, she always told us that the only way for us to get ahead, especially when we came to this country, is to get that education and just to always do our best. So for a while, I had kind of put that aside, and I was like, she doesn't know. You know how kids are. Your mom doesn't know what she's talking about. And I was always successful at some of the things I did, but never quite as successful as I wanted to be, because I wanted to be thankful to my mom for the things that she did for us, the sacrifices. So when I went back to school, and I I've taken my time. I've taken a long time to get, my degree, just because I didn't feel the need for it. But the moment I graduated and I saw that in her eyes, how proud she was. And she told me, she's like, you're reminding me of your dad. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I'm not going to stop now. So I'm just going to continue. I'm going to get my master's. I'm going to get my doctorate, whatever else I can. But to her, it's like, well, how valuable are you now? Because that education can never be taken from you. So even though you may have a tiny bit of an accent, you may slip up on the words sometimes, that's still there. That's yours. And you can share that. You can share that with your kids, and you can be that example for your kids. So I don't know, if it wasn't for my mom and I think my grandma, both of them like pushing me and making me realize how important it is, I probably wouldn't have gotten as far as I've gotten, because to me it was like, yeah, it's cool, and it turns out I really like it, and I'm kind of good at it, and I can share it with other folks, and I can be an advocate, and I can be a champion for people, and I'm like, you know what, let's do this. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mr. Segarra?
Well, I think that, I wasn't always encouraged to go to college, but I think I always tell my parents, it's a miracle because you had 6 kids and we're all independent. They didn't push us hard because my parents were very young. When I was born, my mom was 15 years old. My dad was 17. And so they were more worried about surviving and paying for the kids, making sure that they put food on the table. And they did a great job doing that. I remember one time in Chicago, and I talking about school, and my dad says, I hope Joe, they call me Joe, I hope he just graduates high school. That was, which I did, and that was good. But I always say that they instill something without even realizing in all of us, because with 6 kids, we kind of had to create that self of responsibility, be responsible for ourselves. We grew up in the south side of Chicago, and that's why I say it's a miracle. It's like, wow, none of your kids turn to drugs, to violent crime, or anything like that. And growing up, we had to kind of do things on our own. I remember wanting to play baseball, Little League, and I go to the park. I'm a 12-year-old kid, and I have to walk to the park. It's about 4 blocks away, and they say, well, your parents has to sign this to authorize you to play baseball. So I go home, take it to my mom, and say, Mom, you got to sign it. She signs it, and that was it. I just go get my uniform. I played Little League all season long, and didn't worry about my parents have to be here supporting me. I think that's important nowadays, but back then it was just you didn't even think about it. And so I developed that sense of self-responsibility that they instilled in all of us. So I remember my brother, we all used to like to draw. One of my brothers, he loved to draw. And he tells my dad, he says, I want to go to college. And he says, what do you want to go to college for? I want to be an artist, he tells him. And my dad says, well, if you're going to be an artist, I ain't paying for your college. You ain't going to school to be an artist. But that will was instilled in him, just like all of us. And he says, well, forget it. I don't need you to pay for college. I'm going to college. So he ended up going to college in Chicago, university there. And he graduated with an art degree. 4 years later, he's got a bachelor's degree. And I remember going to his graduation, and they said, okay, what are you going to do with that degree? And, he had such a passion inside of him. I don't know where all of us got that, but, when we put something, we set it in motion, and we just do it. And we don't let anything stop us. And he did. He got a job making video games. He would develop video games, and he'd have to watch cartoons and watch them there. And he just kept at it. Today he makes movies. He's worked on Kung Fu Panda. He's worked on Epic with Beyonce. And this is a little kid that his dad didn't want to pay his college because we are like that. My sister, eventually, she's got a master's degree in marketing. And it's like, where did that come from? It's like, yeah, she's always fighting the parents. You know, and to this day, they still don't get along, you know, real well with my dad, but all of us do well. You know, my mom lives by herself. She's got her own house. It's paid off. She's done that on her own. And her biggest complaint is my kids don't come around enough. You know, I'm always here by myself. And I say, be glad, because I kid around, the Hispanic culture, you usually can't get rid of your kids. And here you are, a mom complaining, and she does all the things on her own. And it's like, be glad. You know, we were raised in a bad area where when I joined the Army, just to kind of give you, I don't know how we became this, but I had a friend who his mom was friends with my mom. And when she talked to him, when I joined the Army, she told her son, my friend, she says, I'm not letting him join the Army. And I say, why not? I don't want him to get killed. You know, he's going to get killed if he joins the Army. And so I went, and then 2 years later, I went back and visited. And guess what? He got killed. He got killed in the streets of Chicago. And she told me, his mom told me, you know, Joe, I should have let him join the Army with you. He would still be here. And that's kind of the upbringing that we grew up in the city of Chicago that way. And that's why I was kidding around. I say, Mom, I don't know how you did it. 6 kids, and every single one of them is independent. They do well. And it wasn't that they were on top of us saying, you got to do this. On the contrary, you know, they try to deter us, because it wasn't because they were trying to deter intention. It's just that they didn't know any better. You know, they were young when they got married, so they were learning how to be parents themselves. You know, parents raising kids. You know, little kids raising kids, and so that's always been my justification as to how I get along with my parents. You know, as you go down, sometimes my other siblings don't like that, but they still get along with them. You know, they may not communicate as much with them, but you know, they're appreciative of where they are because of what our parents did. So.
Thank you. You saying that just brings a lot of memories to me about my growing up and my background as well. In my neighborhood, the guys didn't want to go to school. They just wanted to make money. And their parents were grateful if they didn't end up in jail. And that kind of speaks to a lot of the stereotypes too, but also in the environment that you grow up in. It's a combination of both. And I know for me, I was the odd one, right? I would go to dance class. I was in school. I was doing things that other kids weren't doing, and I didn't have a baby at a young age, and they were just like, "You don't belong here. You're just odd. You're strange." So yeah, all that kind of brings back a lot of memories for me. So we're talking about education. What are your thoughts on cultural appropriation in education? Would you like to get started, Dr. Salazar?
Can you please elaborate on your operationalization of cultural appropriation?
I guess the way that we're represented when others are talking about us, or in books, or as they're educating the children.
Right, definitely. So it's interesting, because I think that depending on the angle that you take a look at what's being presented, there's always an angle, right? Whomever it is that's writing the book, or whomever it is that's providing the narrative, has a particular angle through which they use their own experiences, internal and external, to kind of relay that information. I think that having conversations about cultures as a whole, and having constructive conversations about cultures as a whole, is incredibly important. I think that it needs to be substantiated through grounded theory and evidence, and not just be opinion oriented necessarily. I think that the moderator that's having that conversation needs to make certain that that there is some grounding from that perspective and angle. But I think that the more you get to know about people, like I said before, the more you kind of want to get to know about people. You'll find commonalities between people. That one of my favorite ways of getting to know about people, to be completely honest, is food. Like, that is my initial jump into a culture. I love trying and learning about where, different ingredients come from, and how dishes are formulated, and what goes into them, and like the special symbolism behind dishes, because everybody has their own approach to it. And I find find that when, for example, in my classroom, I have so many foodies in my classroom, in my marketing courses, that makes it a launching pad for being able to speak about different cultures in a way that makes people curious. And the more we become educated about things that we're curious about and have a grounded foundation in our understanding of it, the more we seek to embrace that. And I think that all too often misappropriation or misjudgments are simply because of opinion-oriented contributions. But if you can spark the interest in a group of people through a variety of different ways, then that's a fabulous thing, right? Having conversations and becoming educated and exposed to others, I think, is incredibly important for me.
I think that I hate to say that everything she said so eloquently is how I feel. Cultural, appropriation happens when people know limited amount, so for example, in Texas, they know a lot of the Mexican folks, so they assume everybody Hispanic is Mexican. And that's why it's important to have discussions like this and have platforms, especially like in higher education and all that, because it allows us to educate folks out there and say, no, there's more than just that. But then not make ourselves siloed into these, oh, I'm just Salvadorian, I'm just Mexican. Kind of celebrate the fact that we have our own nationality, but we also have so much things that bind us, like the food and the music, the festivities, the importance of family, and those kind of things. So even though, yeah, it's going to happen, but have those conversations that further enlighten folks. So I'm always about, and not be afraid to talk about it. I think too many times people get so just, they don't want to hurt feelings, or they don't want to just say the wrong thing. They want to keep everything so PR appropriate that they can just say, so tell me more about where you come from. Don't say, what are you, but say, where do you come from? What is your background? And it's okay to have those conversations, and it's okay to have those questions asked. I think I'd appreciate it more if someone came up to me and said, you look Mexican, but I know you're probably not. Where do you come from? Or what's your background? And then I'll be like, oh, yeah, and kind of carry on, because I can talk forever. So
In 1970, I was in 4th grade at an elementary school in Austin, Texas, just off of what they now call SoCo, South Congress. And I have a distinct memory of a teacher in social studies. We were studying flowers, of all things. Now, it's like, that's relevant to this conversation. Why? Well, one of the flowers of Texas, we'll all remember, is a yellow flower with big petals, and then it has a big brown cone in the middle. Does everybody remember that flower? I'm sorry, I can't recite it by its name. And she called it a sombrero flower. And she said the reason why it was called that is because Mexicans are lazy and they're always sleeping. Now, that is a distinct memory from 1970, from being 12 years old in a classroom and learning about flowers, which should be non-racial. And all of a sudden, it's a racial discussion about how lazy Mexicans are. And even as a 12-year-old, I remember pushing back against that, because I had grown up in communities where entire Hispanic households worked. Everybody worked. It wasn't just the mom and the dad, it was everybody. And in my own family, I had to work. My dad was in the military, but he was unreliable and got kicked out of the military a lot. And when he did, we were in housing projects. And if I didn't throw papers, I was a paper girl. I think it's kind of funny, I'm in the media now. I started out throwing newspapers. If I didn't have that job, there were times when we didn't eat. My mother cleaned houses. Very, very humble, very, very hardworking families. So it made no sense to me whatsoever that stereotype existed. And I've worked very hard in education to make sure that the way we reference each other and talk about each other, especially the Hispanic community, is appropriate, is truthful, does reflect the culture and its values.
All right. Am I next?
Yes,
Can
sir.
you hear me? All right. I think if I understand the question right, culture appropriations, I think that where that begins, I think it's at home. As society eh, evolves, as we try to educate others, we can only do so much, especially within the Hispanic culture. And like I said earlier, I grew up in Chicago, but I grew up mostly in Mexican areas, even though I'm from Puerto Rico. So I had a better understanding growing up of Mexicans. I love Mexican food. I like tostadas. I didn't like Puerto Rican. And it was because my family really didn't push that on us. I just kind of grew up in that culture of Hispanic. And so when we try to educate other people that are not from the Hispanic culture, I think that we're all going to have some challenges because, there's so many cultures within that Hispanic culture. I think there's only so much we can do. And within our culture, I think a lot of us tend to lose that. And we see that today. We see a lot of people that are from the Hispanic culture, but they don't know Spanish. And, you see that in my family. I was the oldest. So growing up, my mom spoke Spanish. By the time you get to the sixth child, forget it. He ain't speaking Spanish. And why is that? We all grew up in the same household with the same parents, but yet he doesn't speak Spanish and I do. And it's because, when you get out there in the outside world, you're going to adapt to your upbringing outside the family environment. So I think that it's very important that the family keep that culture within, and sometimes it's a challenge, and so you see that a lot. You see a lot, especially in Texas. A lot of times I see people and they do have the Mexican heritage, but they don't speak Spanish, they don't. And sometimes we don't even know what that is because I make fun of it. We talk about foods and sometimes I go to a Mexican restaurant and I say, that is not Mexican food. That looks like a cheese whiz cheesecake on a piece of, that is not real Mexican. But it's adapted to the environment. It's adapted to more of what people are going to buy, because maybe they may not like if it was really Mexican food. So, it's one of those things that we have to learn how to continue doing, developing that culture within the family itself. We cannot go out blaming the world because we're losing the culture. We can't say, it is the school's responsibility that you teach culture, that you educate my children in this Hispanic culture when it's really our responsibility.
Tina, I thought of something I'd like to add that the mayor inspired, if I may.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Close, are you there? You can go ahead and speak. I think we lost her connection. I'll keep looking to see if she gets back on. So one of the things I heard here was some of the stereotyping. Have any of y'all had any negative or positive? I'm not sure how it would be positive, but it could be. We can always spin a negative into a positive. Have you ever had any experiences directly where, stereotyping it impacted you in some way?
I have. I still experience from a negative perspective stereotyping. Not too long ago, I was at HEB and I had some very slanderous words spoken to me about how, I'm a wetback and shouldn't be here, and that I should get myself some education. And I thought, well, that's kind of ironic, right? You know nothing about a person, and you're so quick to offer up these. These words. And so it's something that's very real and that's still very shocking. Every time it happens, it still is very shocking that, that people feel comfortable enough to engage in that kind of discourse. And I think that it's disconcerting. But I try to, I try to embrace the opportunity as best I can to correct the stereotype based slander and just give them a distinct perspective in terms of how they're wrong, right? And I've not only experienced it, my child has experienced it as well, and she's 6, and so anything from from being a wetback or uneducated or unable to read, and to the mayor's point earlier, in terms of speaking Spanish, many families make it a concerted effort to not teach Spanish in their household so that their children are speaking fluent English and they don't have accents to their language, and that they can assimilate or immerse themselves as being American. And I think that is such a disservice, because bilingualism, trilingualism, learning languages is such a beautiful thing that should be embraced. And I think that it's unfortunate to have it be a concerted effort because of the discomfort that sometimes takes place and in the household itself. So that's kind of my 2 cents for this question.
It's funny you mentioned HGV because that was my experience as well. My daughter, I think she's maybe about 1, when children are babbling. And my husband was singing to her in Spanish because she loves this one song. And he was just kind of like pushing her around and she was babbling along. And this older gentleman comes up to him. He's like, well, if you taught her English, then maybe we could understand what she's saying. And I was shocked. I turned around and looked at him. I was like, that's funny though, because we're teaching her how to sing in Spanish and in English at this point. I said, so I don't understand where you come from with that. And he's like, this is America. And he like walked away, right? And it wasn't so much for me. I was offended for my kid because I know that going forward, she's going to hear that many times. And anytime someone comes up to me and says, well, go back to your country, I'm like, well, I just did my DNA test and like 50% of my family comes from this part of the world. So I'm home, things like that. I guess maybe because it happens so much, I kind of just not even pay attention to it anymore. And it makes me feel sorry for those folks who want to attack, because they have to grasp at straws just to, oh, you're a wetback, oh, you're this, because they don't understand enough. But yeah, it's something that I wish we wouldn't do to each other as humans, because it's not right, and then the children hear it and the children repeat it. And that's where I think we're causing the greatest harm, because going forward, I know my kid's going to hear it again in school. They might make fun of her because when she speaks Spanish, and it comes from both sides sometimes though, like the Spanish folks, oh, you're not Spanish enough. And then the American folks, oh, you're not American enough. So it's like, you're kind of caught between these worlds. So struggle sometimes. But I'm okay. I'm willing to take it on,
Yeah, it's funny because, I've experienced that definitely. When I was growing up, we moved from the Hispanic side. Then we went to further south, where it was a place called Marquette Park, and it was all white. That's where I went to high school with. It was called Gage Park. And you have African Americans go through one door, whites go through the other, and I was like the only Puerto Rican there. It's like the only Hispanic. Like, what door do I use? And you get bombarded by racist comments a lot of times. But then I wouldn't respond in a negative way, and I've learned to do that. And before you know it, I can go either one. People didn't matter. To know you. I think that you can bring them around. People really sometimes are mean to strangers, and that's how come I'm probably in sales today. Sales is one of those businesses that is of terrible. People do not like to get those calls. If you have a slight accent, they're going to tell you the most ridiculous thing on the phone just to get rid of you. And so you have to have some very thick skin. I've seen Army veterans here in my office start shaking because they faced rejections, and Army veterans that have fought wars. I had one, and I said, my first thing is to help you overcome your fears. And he says, Jose, I don't have fears. I've been to Iraq 3 times. I said, I'm talking about a different type of fear. And it's that fear of rejection. And a lot of times I think that because of some of the negative stereotypes, some of the craziness that I grew up with, it has allowed me to respond in a different way because it's, racism is not just from the whites or anything like that. A lot of Puerto Ricans are racist too. And so even within our culture, my grandfather, like I say, my grandmother was dark. They didn't want my grandfather to marry her because she was black. And this is Puerto Rico, and they're both Puerto Rican. So you see that within the culture yourself. So you can't just blame one society because we see it a lot within our own culture. So racism is something that I think that it's something that's always going to continue when people want to put you down. It's unfortunate, but I think the key is just teaching people how to respond in a way that it doesn't stop them. It doesn't create such a terrible impression that they want to give up, that they change life's journey. Sometimes people face something so bad that they quit. I don't want that job. I don't want to go to that school no more because they're racist. I don't want this. And that's terrible because now we stopped following whatever it is that we want. So I think that's the important thing is just, I say, let your kids know they're going to face that. Don't try to hide it. But it's not about trying to hide it. It's to helping them overcome it and not letting them, change the path, change that journey because you're going to face all kinds of obstacles, not just racism. You're going to face all kinds of things. I think the thing that a lot of us do, and this happened to me growing up too. I remember I had an uncle and I would apply for a job and I wouldn't get it. And his first response, oh, they're a bunch of racists. And I say, are they? And he says, yeah, they're right. They don't want to hire you. You shouldn't go back there. And then I had somebody else, I had a friend growing up and he says, just apply again, go back and do it. And I would do it and I would get it. And so I say, you know what? It's that attempt to keep doing what you want and not let these little remarks stop you. And so that's what we got to teach people.
Thank you. And that's a great segue to my next question. All three of you have identified that you have children. How do you balance that with your children? Obviously they're living in America, they're living in Texas. How do you teach them to handle situations like that? So if you don't mind elaborating a little bit on that.
I think that's a really great question. For my child, as I mentioned before, she's 6 years old and she moved here when I moved here. So she was an infant when I started at our institution. And before this, we were in El Paso. And my parents started a really successful business in El Paso. And I grew up for quite a while there. And I did all of my education at the University of Texas at El Paso. When I had my child, my parents asked me, baby girl, you're moving to Central Texas. Would you like to leave her with us? I said, no, absolutely not. And so their claim was that they were not going to have any time with her anymore. And we're a very close, tight-knit family, and family is very important to us. And I said, well, parents, why don't you retire from your situation here, move with me to Central Texas. And we're blessed enough to be able to have the opportunity to have them move with me. And when I moved here, they moved to the area with me. And that was a concerted, intentional effort to make sure that our culture did not disappear, that they had immersive exposure to my parents, that we still practiced, that they were, helping me when I'm at work, raise her, and she's getting values instilled in her and the importance of those values from people that love her and care about her and want to make sure that she's growing up to be proud of who she is, just like they helped me be proud of who I am. And so whenever it is that we come across situations like the HEB situation where and I had this come up, it hasn't been wherein I'm alone. They've actually told me that kind of stuff when I'm with her, and she's heard it, right? And so she's been exposed to that kind of situation before. And after I speak with the individuals that spoke to us, and after we complete, usually it's in line, right? Like as I'm waiting in line to pay for my stuff. After we pay for our stuff, I took her to the side and I said, look, baby girl, I said, there are going to be situations that are going to be suboptimal for you. And that happens for everybody. I said, but you need to be strong in who you are. You need to appreciate and value your moral fiber and how you're growing up and the things that are a part of you, and never shun away from the fact that that there is something to be said about the loveliness that everybody has inside of them. They just haven't gotten to know us. They haven't gotten to know people like us. And unfortunately, that's a lack of education. I said, the more education somebody gets about a group of people, the more they'll learn to appreciate it. And so when we go to different places, and when you have the opportunity to learn from and to experience and to embrace other cultures, I want you to take this situation and use it for your own experience, and make sure that you're embracing other people's cultures as well, and that you're appreciating their moral fiber and their value systems and their contributions, because it's all of this, like in your crayon box where we have all of these amazingly beautiful crayons, like in your crayon box where you have all of these amazingly precious colors. Everybody is precious in their own right, and you have to learn to appreciate that, right? And so she sees that, and I was like, what benefit would it be if everybody was, if everybody was a cerulean blue? You would just have this one color over and over again. You don't want that, right? You want this rainbow of beautiful colors, and so you have to learn to appreciate that. And I think that children are very, very smart from a very, very early age, and you make it understandable to them. And just like if you approach them from a positive perspective, they internalize it. Unfortunately, those individuals that have spoken to me before, some of them have had children along their side, and those children are learning those particular behaviors from their parents. And I think that we have to take a little bit more responsibility in making sure that we're proactive in embracing and appreciating everybody's beautiful color, if you will.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Close. I finally got back in after getting dropped out of the WebEx by video. Sorry. Can you bring me up to speed with what that question was?
The panelists were discussing education and family, and we kind of came around talking about children. And so I asked the question how they balance, all the racism and the awkward situations when they're with their children are there to witness it, one, but two, when they have to deal with it on their own. So I was just asking the question of, as a parent, how are they managing that with their children? So Dr. Salazar was our first speaker on that topic. But I hope you remember what you said, and I hope you write it down so we can come back what you wanted to say before you got cut off, because I'd like for them to finish their thoughts and then come back to your last, what you wanted to say before.
Sure.
Is that okay? Okay.
Oh,
Thank
that's wonderful. And I can relinquish my time because I am not a parent. I could only speak to how it works in my family with my family's children.
Sure. If you want to share, please share.
I think the thing that I enjoy the most about the diversity of the culture is that children pick it up so quickly. I've had nieces and nephews that I teach Spanish to from a very young age. And even now that they're not young anymore, we would call it Spanglish, I guess. But, the very first times I was teaching it to them, I remember my little nephew sitting in the bathroom. We were trying to get him to take his evening bath. And he said, but Ran, I don't want to bañarme. And, it just came so natural to them to blend the language, to embrace the language. And I think that's important. And that happened many, many years ago, but I still remember it to this day. And to this day, it's still a part of the language that the family uses when they get together. So maybe it's a little bit of a cultural appropriation, but it was just an easy fit for our family.
Thank you.
I guess I'm next. I have two beautiful girls. My first one, she's 21 years old, and her father is African American, and me being Salvadorian. And for a while there, I was basically the one raising her. So I always told her, be proud of who you are, baby. and because she's very ambiguous. It's really kind of hard to peg what she is. So that's why I love the phrase Latina X, because that's how she identifies, you know. And I think she finds power in that because of how we've raised her. We always raised her to be proud of who she was. It didn't matter that her skin was darker or maybe lighter than whoever she came across. She didn't pick up Spanish, and she regrets it now, even though we tried teaching her. But she is very proud of being Spanish. She talks about her experience as a Latina, and then she also talks about her experience as a Black woman. So she takes both of those things. And she's come across racism, of course. You know, she gets it from actually everywhere. So she gets it from the Hispanic culture that you're not Spanish enough, and she gets it from the Black culture, you're not Black enough, and then of course whatever other stuff is out there. But I've always told her, I said, don't come at it with anger, come at it with compassion. And said, look, I understand that you don't understand who I am, and that may frighten you, but let me show you what I have and what I hold and what makes me special and what makes me fabulous, because she's, of course, I'm biased because she's my daughter, but she's beautiful, you know, and intelligent, and she has so much to add to any conversation. And she's very proud of being, you know, Salvadorian, and immersing herself in that culture. Now with my 5-year-old, she's full Hispanic. She's Puerto Rican and Salvadorian. And she has started asking those questions of, so what does it mean to be, you know, Latina? That's how she calls herself, Latina. And I said, well, baby, you know, it means that this is what we bring to the table. And of course, music and food is her thing. So, I always tell her, I'm like, look, just people may say ugly things sometimes because she hears it, especially TV, and you know, you watch it in the media, and she kind of doesn't understand some things. But I'm like, and it's okay, baby. I said, not everybody's gonna be nice, but don't be mad at them for not being nice. I said, try to teach them that who you are makes you special, and if they don't appreciate that, then they're not worth your time. You know, even though she's 5, she's picking up on that really quickly. You know, and she is already proud of who she is, and that's the only thing I know that the word can be real hurtful, and sometimes you just kind of get overwhelmed and you just want to close off and just lash out, but I don't think you're not helping anybody by being that way. You know, it always helps to kind of turn that into, I guess maybe because I'm a positive person, I always turn that over and say, look, I understand that you're slightly afraid of not knowing who I am, and the first thing that's going to come out of your mouth is negativeness, but why don't you just see what I bring to the table? If you still don't like it, then it's okay. You know, we can agree to disagree, but get to know who I am, and that's what I've taught them. And I think so far it's worked. My eldest is, you know, she's killing it in Austin, and the little one, hopefully she'll be president one day, she says. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, that would be awesome. Mayor?
Well, we're past the age of kids. We have grandkids that we get to enjoy, and they are like 7, 10, and 11. So they're still at that age where, you know, after we get tired of them, we send them back to their parents. So it's like, go home. But it's amazing because, you know, I think at that age, as far as helping develop kids, you know, we get to see their personalities, and every kid is unique. Every kid wants to have their own different personalities. But that commonality, I think, with them is that even though, like most of the kids nowadays, even though they don't know Spanish, you know, the mom is Spanish, she knows Spanish. The dad, who's our son, doesn't know Spanish, so he grew up not really speaking Spanish. And the kids, that's how they're growing up, not learning how to speak Spanish. But they understand their culture, you know, because of the mom, you know, they love to eat Mexican food, but the main thing that we as grandparents, especially my wife, Laura, what she tries to instill in that is the same thing that I mentioned earlier. It's just overcoming, because we always tell them you're going to face challenges, but the main thing is how you respond. You don't give up. And so the middle one, who's the girl, she's 10 years old. She's got a very strong personality, and I think that's because she's in between 2 boys. But so a lot of times when she doesn't get her way, she gets mad and she gives up. So we're always trying to encourage her, and she seems to be coming around, and that it's what she does, you know. So we celebrate when she does something good versus And I used to make that mistake too. And my wife told me, she says, you're always complimenting herself, but that can be hurtful. You got to compliment on the things that she does so that she can be proud of, certain accomplishments, not just take pride of because she's her, because she's your kid and you love her and all that. That's good to do. But so we're trying to teach them and celebrate the small accomplishments that they do to make sure that they can adapt as they grow up. Otherwise, when something wrong happens, we tend, like I said earlier, we tend to give up. Somebody hurt us, they hurt our feelings, they made us feel bad, which is going to happen. You can't protect them from that all the time. And so you just have to teach them to just adapt and just overcome no matter what. So.
Thank you. And so we have about 10 more minutes, so I'm going to ask my last question and then see if we have just a moment for any questions. I see a lot of wonderful conversations and comments happening in the chat box. So I see Dr. Salazar has chimed in a little bit. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's sharing some good stories and some that are not so nice. One person shared an unfortunate interaction, a very negative interaction her granddaughter had at school. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your comments. My last question is, being an American, how does it feel when you don't see yourself represented in American culture? I know in my household, and my husband doesn't see us represented in TV, something simple as a movie. Right? There's no superhero that's Hispanic. We don't have a Hispanic superhero, just the ones in our homes. So that upsets him. And when he understands that an organization has ties to going back as far as the Holocaust, he decides he's not going to support that company anymore. So how does that have an impact on you? Again, the question is, how does it feel when you don't see yourself represented in American culture?
Hi. So I think that that's a really interesting question. I really like it. I think that the representation in American culture is incredibly important, not just for Hispanic Americans, but really for all cultures. And I think that it really would, from a marketing perspective, allow for the understanding and embracing of multiple cultures if there was better representation through the media. So as a marketer, when I decided to pursue my PhD, one of the major reasons that I wanted to pursue a PhD is so that I could be in the classroom and so that people could see that I had something to contribute and so that I could be a point of exposure. And I've made it a point as an assistant professor of marketing to involve myself in organizations that are championing the incorporation of other cultures within the media, within education, within academia. I serve on the board of directors for the Marketing Ethnic Faculty Association, which is a board dedicated to bringing together minority PhDs in marketing. And so we have really wonderful conversations, and we have a gathering and grouping of all sorts of walks of life when it comes to these minorities that form part of it. And we're highly immersed in the conversations within the media to represent the different cultures that exist within the United States, but also around the world. And I think that the lack of representation is something that we should be concerned with. At least I'm concerned with it. But I think that there have also been positive movements in the direction of incorporation and in the direction of a shift in the way that certain corporations handle their communications, and that certain identified sponsors engage in the communication because they see the importance of that incorporation now a lot more than they did several years back.
It's funny that this question, I find it a little, not funny, but when you think of Salvadorians, you see a lot of the maids on the movies, or you think of MS-13. You know, you think of the bad people, the gangbangers, and that's not what, you know, my culture is about, not my people are about. So what I take it upon as a personal thing for me to make that not a thing. And I can't change the world, but I can change my world. So I try to advocate not just for Salvadorians or Central Americans or whatever, but just Hispanic people in general, as we are a rich, diverse culture that each one of us brings something different, and each one of us is different. And if we start representing in our world, in our small space, and then that can kind of go forward, you know. So I see the representation. I don't like the representation I see. So I like to change the minds of the folks I do come across, because I can make that difference in changing those perspectives. And like Dr. Salazar said, it's our opportunity to teach, and it's left to us to be those advocates for our own people. Having discussions like this, that so many people are getting connected and learning and listening, and just participating. You know, I'm part of LULAC. Even within, like I said, the Hispanic culture, I represent my own folks. So just take that upon ourselves and take that forward, be in that positive representation, be in that positive face to kind of change some of those stereotypes that exist. So.
Well, I think you said it correctly, because I think it is up to us. I always believe that, you know, we as Hispanic, we have to get out in front, you know, stop hiding behind a rock. And a lot of us, we tend to do that. You know, as mayor, I belong to a lot of different organizations, and a lot of times you're trying to get people to be part of that. And I look for people of different cultures, but sometimes it's hard. You know, it's like you want to, nope, nope, nope. We tend to be close knitted. And so, like you mentioned LULAC, and we even have the Hispanic Chamber, you know, even those, you know, Hispanics will cling to those, but even those, you know, if you look at the Hispanic Chamber, I was telling Mr. Rivera, who's the president, I said, you know what? Over half of the members here are non-Hispanics, because what a lot of different cultures, you know, what they do is they go out of their own culture. You know, a lot of people want to be part of the Hispanic Chamber. They want to be part of LULAC, but then you turn that around and you say, you know what? I want to be on the city council. Right now, we have people running for city council. I could not find one single Hispanic that wants to be part of his city council. And it's like, wow. So we can't blame people if we don't get out in front ourselves. And so who knows when we'll see another Hispanic. And it's not because we don't have enough here. It's just that people don't want to do that. The Hispanic Chamber, the same thing. Who wants to be president? Well, so it has to be a Caucasian or African American, because the Hispanics, we don't like to be, I guess we're too shy or something like that. But we need strong people, you know, like the ones here on this video call that, you know, you guys are the inspiration that people need to be able to see and say, wow, you know, look at how far they've come. Look at how far I want to be like them. But if we keep pushing people towards organizations that we only feel comfortable with, then we're not going to advance. You know, if you're Hispanic, you should be part of the Hispanic Chamber or the LULAC. No, you should be part of the Clean Free Clinic. You should be part of the Clean Chamber. Well, how many Hispanics are there? Probably none. Well, that's why you need to be there. And they don't want to do that. And it's like, oh no, but if it's Hispanic, I'll be there. And so that is we do it to ourselves. And so we can't go around blaming anybody else when we don't advance, you know? And so a lot of the Hispanics, same thing. We want to watch a movie, but it's got to be a novela. So that's where all the Hispanics got to go, is a novela. It's up to us. It's up to us to step out in front and lead the way, because we have advanced so many. When people talk about the United States, you know, the huge melting pot, we've advanced in so many other countries. You know, I say, well, how many Americans have run for president in Mexico, you know, or Puerto Rico, or you know, they're not, you know, so we dominate on all those other fronts. We just want to expand here in the United States, which I think we're doing a pretty good job, but we just need to advance it much more. But again, it's going to be up to us.
Hi, Tina. This is Dr. Close.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to quickly address this. I know we're looks like we're running very short on time. You know, in 1978, in the city of San Antonio, it was illegal for a Hispanic person to own property north of Hildebrand. That was a law in the books. And it was organizations like MALDEF and LULAC that got together and went to the federal government and made them reconstruct the way people voted in the city of San Antonio. It used to be one large district with at-large elections. That year, it became 9 separate city council districts, and that year, they elected 5 people of color to the San Antonio City Hall, to the city council. I remember all this very directly because I was a political science student getting my undergraduate degree, and I went to work for what they called then the minority majority city council. And the lessons that I learned in that year interning in that environment of city governance, where a city was so clearly divided, the right to vote will set the tone that we all exist in. And I think, you know, Mayor, when you talk about people not wanting to be part of the chamber, I don't want to wax into my political beliefs, but I think we can all agree that in an environment that is intolerant politically, that kind of thing is going to happen because it feels dangerous to identify racially. And if we can thank COVID for anything, it has really laid bare the places in our culture where we really have to question the racism that might still exist and needs to be discussed. And it makes me proud to be a part of this panel for that very reason. There has been a startling lack of diversity in colleges and universities among the faculty and staff for as far back as I can remember. Even at, community colleges where I've worked, it's been predominantly Anglo and predominantly male. I was 30 years old before I ever saw a woman college president, and I can still remember where I was standing when I saw her. I started to do research on the shockingly small numbers of Hispanics that still to this day enter into graduate school. So it thrills me to hear people say, I want my doctorate, I want my graduate degree, because those numbers make speed limits in school zones look large. They are startlingly small.
Thank you so much. And that is our time. I'm going to just hand it over to Dr. Britt. Dr. Britt, do you have any final words? And before she speaks, I just want to thank the panelists for joining us today. Great job. Thank you so much. And everyone who's attended today, thank you so much. And for those of you who shared your comments and your stories, I appreciate you being so open with us. Dr. Britt, would you like to send us off?
I have to remember to take that mute. If all of you who are right now thrust into cyberspace, that little red microphone is the plague of my existence. Just trying to remember to unmute myself before I start this wonderful dialogue that's going on in my head. I want to thank everybody, as Tina has done so eloquently, for joining us for our first diversity discussion of the year. I want to keep it in your ears that we are keeping the conversation going. So just because October 15th is coming, it does not mean that we stop discussing the importance of keeping Hispanic and Latino culture alive in America, and that it's an important part of who we are as Americans. So keep that conversation going. Take the information that you've learned today, use it as a conversation starter. When you see the beautiful tones of skin and that beautiful features of our Hispanic and Latin people, and you're afraid to ask, where are your people from? Don't be afraid. ask them and start that conversation. Learn more about them. Fall in love with them so that you have a connection that can't be broken. Because once we all decide that we're all American, everything else goes out the window. Thank you so much for your time. Keep your emails on alert. We will be sending more information about upcoming events. Our next event will be in celebration of American Indian Heritage, which will begin in November. But until then, keep an eye on our webpage for upcoming events. This event has been recorded and will live on our YouTube channel. So subscribe to TAMUCT as our YouTube provider, and then also keep an eye on our webpage, which is tamuct.edu/diversity. Everyone have an amazing week, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.